A great tutor can accelerate your learning, but finding the right one isn't easy. To get the best results, you need to be patient and try many options. Here is how. Hello and welcome to the Hacking Chinese podcast. In this week's episode, we are going to continue the discussion about Chinese tutors and private teachers. Hiring someone to help you improve your Mandarin is a great idea if you can afford it. As a beginner, one of the best ways to improve is to have meaningful interactions with somebody else, and presumably someone who knows what you do and can adjust their language to your level, and a tutor can be very good for that. A tutor can, of course, support your learning beyond the beginner stage as well, but once your Chinese is good enough to read basic stories and engage in conversations with normal people who aren't tutors and not necessarily specifically good at talking with beginners, I think the value drops off a little bit, although, like I said, I still think that tutors can be great for intermediate and advanced students. Naturally, how much a tutor contributes to your learning depends on what you're doing with the tutor, and that is something we looked at in the first episode in this series. That episode is called How to Get the Most Out of Your Chinese Tutoring Sessions, and it's episode 254. And in that episode, we discussed what you as a student can bring to tutoring sessions to get more out of them. Then, in part 2, 7 characteristics of a great Chinese tutor or private teacher, which was episode 256, we talked about the teacher side of the equation. So essentially what you should look for when hiring a tutor, or maybe how to evaluate the tutor you have now. In this third part, we're going to discuss the practical aspects of finding a tutor. Sure, you could just pick a random method of finding a tutor and then sticking with the first one that you find, but this is very unlikely to yield good results. I tried to estimate how many teachers or private tutors that have helped me learn Chinese over the years, and I ended up with 50 or so. I would say that all these people helped me and contributed to my learning in some way, and I'm immensely grateful for that, but it's also true that there is a huge variation in how much they contributed and in what way. If you take one thing away from this episode, it should be that you should expect to try many tutors before you find a good one, and even more than that if you want to find the best one for you. I know it can be tempting to stick with the first decent tutor you find, but I strongly encourage you to keep looking, because the difference between an okay tutor and a great tutor is immense, and if you're paying for a tutor, you should get value out of it. That's the whole point. Knowing when to stop is not easy. I mean, in theory, you could check 1,000 tutors and then choose the best one, but that means you will spend most of your time looking for tutors and not as much time learning Mandarin, and so that would be counterproductive. On the other hand, if you stop looking too early, you might not know what a great tutor is, so maybe the next tutor you would have tried would have been awesome, and you just think that your current decent tutor is great. One practical way of thinking about this, which is related to the optimal stopping theory, is to first determine how many tutors you can consider checking out in total as a max, and then apply the 37% rule. This essentially means that you should sample 37% of the total number you might consider trying to get a feel for what good means, and then pick the next one which is better than all the ones you've already tried. This rule does not actually fully apply here because unlike when selecting a romantic partner, it's rarely a problem to go back to an earlier tutor you had if you think they are better than all the ones you found afterwards. Still, it highlights the importance of exploring and trying many options to get an idea for what is suitable for you, and then once you know what a good tutor is, you settle on one you like. Naturally, you could have 2 or more tutors as well, and I think there is an argument to be made for alternating tutors. For example, instead of hiring 1 tutor and meeting them once a week, you hire 2 tutors and you meet them every other week instead. This gives you more variation, but it also means that the tutors can complement each other. Maybe one of them is very good at something the other one isn't, and the other way around. So let's talk about how to actually find a tutor. And this discussion will need to be a little bit general by necessity, because I don't know where you live, and finding a tutor in Beijing is not the same thing as finding one in rural Canada, for example. The first choice to be made is if you're going to find someone locally or online. And depending on where you live, this might be a decision that's made for you. If there are no Chinese teachers where you live, you will have to go online. So at first glance, this seems to be a purely practical decision. If you can find a tutor who can help you offline, in person, then that's great. And if you can't, you go online. For most people, everything else being equal, I think it's generally true that people prefer in-person tutoring. Meeting someone in real life and interacting with them is simply more engaging than doing the same thing online, and physical reality also has a higher bandwidth than cyberspace, so some things just work better offline. For example, chorus mimicking is very difficult to do in Zoom, even with just a little bit of latency, but it's not a problem in real life. However, I do think that online tutoring has several benefits over offline tutoring, even if both are available to you. First, you will have a wider selection of tutors. As we discussed earlier in this episode, if you want to find a great tutor, you should expect to check many. Well, if you live in a major city, you might be able to find 10 Chinese teachers and check them out, but it's unlikely that this is as easy as doing it online. Online tutoring is also practical and efficient. You don't need to spend time to go to meet your tutor physically. You don't even need to go out. You can just turn your computer on. And this, of course, means you can spend more time actually learning Chinese. Many students also feel safer behind a screen. If you're an introverted learner, like I am, or suffer from any kind of speaking anxiety or think it's scary to speak with native speakers, doing so online can feel considerably less scary than doing so in person. There are also some practical benefits of digital tutoring because all the notes and so on are readily available. Maybe you can record parts of the tutoring session to review later and so on. And while these things are possible to do in person, they are kind of automatic and easy to do online. Finally, online tutoring is generally speaking cheaper. There are many reasons for this, but the most important one is, of course, that the tutor doesn't need to be in the same country as you are. If salaries in your country are higher than they are in China, you should expect to find cheaper tutors online. So the bottom line here is that even if you can find tutors offline, it could be a good idea to find one online anyway. Still, like I said, there are some significant benefits with in-person tutoring. So how do you go about finding a tutor offline locally? Well, as mentioned, this will depend on where you live, but there are a few principles or strategies that you can try. If you live abroad in an immersion environment, I'm not going to say too much about this because it's so easy to find people locally, but you can, for example, check universities, search online, ask friends, including native speakers and other learners, visit a local language school, and so on. It's likely that your problem is not to find a tutor, but rather a good one. If you don't live in a country where Chinese is widely spoken, your options are more limited. You will probably have to balance finding a good tutor with the risk of being too picky and not finding anyone at all. The first strategy I think you should try is local universities. And there are two options here. First, most universities will have students who speak Mandarin. I mean, if they study computer science or economics, they probably aren't professional language teachers, but they could still, in theory, be interested in helping you out. Second, many universities have Chinese language programs, so check with them or the students there, not necessarily because you would like to enroll in the courses, but because it grants you access to people who can at least teach Chinese. Many universities also host events for exchange students and the like, and so for example at my alma mater we had a conversation corner where people could come to practice their Chinese or their Japanese, and this was completely free and something you could just join, no matter if you were enrolled in a program or not. Beyond universities, you can also check local tutoring companies or agencies which offer private tutoring, although this is likely to be more expensive than finding someone individually. Next, you can also check online tutoring platforms, and yes, I'm aware that we're still talking about offline tutoring, but what you can do is check where tutors are based and then contact them and simply ask if they are available for in-person tutoring if they live in the same city as you do. My final recommendation for finding offline tutors is to go to a local meetup for Chinese learners. And naturally, it depends on where you live, if there even are such meetups, but I would say that the likelihood is pretty good if you live in a major city. Let's move on to online tutoring, and here of course, as we've mentioned already, there are many more options, perhaps too many options. If you search for online Mandarin tutor, you will find hundreds if not thousands of results. These can be roughly sorted into three categories: online language schools and teaching services, online tutoring platforms, and content creators. So first, online schools and teaching services are organizations where you join classes or study with a private tutor. There's usually a vetting process for tutors, making these services a bit more reliable than the free-for-all of tutoring platforms. How reliable depends on the school or the service, and some of them might also have specific profiles or tutoring programs that further unify the learning experience in different ways. If you want a few concrete suggestions for online schools and teaching services you can check out, please head over to the written article on Hacking Chinese. The reason I don't want to list things here in the podcast is that I might update the list and I can update an article, but updating this podcast episode is not so easy. Next up, we have online tutoring platforms. These are services that essentially connect an individual tutor to an individual student. There is usually no vetting process, and the platform does not take responsibility for the teachers or anything like that. It's just an agency, essentially, which connects you as a student with a teacher. Naturally, you can still rely on reviews and what other students have said, and there is a rating system and so on, but as mentioned earlier, it's still a free-for-all, which can be rather chaotic. Here, you should probably expect to try a few more tutors than if you go to a school. Finally, you can check online content creators. Many YouTube channels or podcasts for Chinese learners also offer tutoring services of different kinds. If you've found content creators that you enjoy, you can also consider asking them if they have a tutoring service. It's time to wrap up this episode by saying that studying with a tutor, even if infrequently and irregularly, can be immensely helpful, but only if you find the right tutor. I hope that in this episode, and the previous ones in this series, I've given you a lot of ideas for how to find a better tutor and also how to get more out of your tutoring sessions. Good luck! Thank you for tuning in to the Hacking Chinese podcast. If you like this episode, please share it. More information and inspiration about learning and teaching Chinese can be found at hackingchinese.com. See you in the next episode, and until then, good luck with your studies.